Welcome to One-on-One. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper, and today we have my favorite county councilman. He's back again to talk about some stuff that's on the ballot in November, which is really soon. It's like 30 days away. Marc Kilmer from District 2, Wicomico County Council. Welcome, Marc.
Well, thank you for having me. You're going to get me in trouble with my base by saying you're my, that I'm your favorite county council member. So, thanks for that.
That's
you just
true.
Cost me some votes there, Greg.
They're all my favorite. You're my favorite one from District 2.
Okay, thank you.
Talk to me about what's going to be on the ballot. There's going to be a lot of stuff for people to look at when they're in the voting booth this year. Just tell me what's going to be on the ballot.
Well, I mean, there's going to be more questions than usual for the voters to.
And these are amendments to the county charter.
Yeah, there's amendments to the county charter. There's also the school board referendums on there. So there'll be 10 kind of local issues, including the school board referendum.
Right.
And we decided to do that this year because it's a presidential election year. It's a shorter ballot. You don't have local races. So since you're not voting on as many people, let's put some of these questions on the ballot. Some of which are left over from the Charter Review Committee, and some of which have come up, because of the day-to-day governing of the county. So, basically, there's 9 amendments that go through a variety of things, such as special elections if there's vacancies for the council or the executive, the budget process, what to do with money that the council cuts, personnel manual, things like that.
So the charter is basically, it's the county's constitution. It's how the government works in the county.
Yeah.
There's a charter review committee that meets every 10 years?
Yeah, there's a charter review committee that meets every 10 years. I was on that. John Cannon was on that. Wayne Strausberg was on that briefly before he was appointed director of administration under Rick Pollitt. So that met, and that charter review committee recommended, I would say, over 20 amendments, and 3 were put on the ballot.
Now, is this the
4 years ago.
2012 one, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that meets every 10 years, like you say, and they recommended some things in 2012, and 3 of those were put on the ballot, and some of these are left over from what that charter review committee recommended. But our charter is relatively new. The new form of government was put in place, I believe.
10 years before, in 2002, that
Yeah.
charter review committee introduced the county executive form of government.
Exactly. And 2006 was the first time you had the county executive, and so part of the issue is you have a new charter and you have a new form of government, which is basically what Wicomico County had. You have day-to-day governing, and you see some bumps in the road that happen. I mean, that happened with the federal constitution, and our charter's far less perfect than the federal constitution. But in the decades after the Constitution was enacted, there were a variety of amendments to because they figured out some things didn't work in it, some things could have worked better. So we're kind of going through somewhat of the same process in that these are things that the Charter Review Committee recommended 12 years ago, 14 years ago. We're working through some of the issues, so let's tweak them where they don't work. And so that's these really are basically housekeeping matters. There may be a few that rise to a little bit level a little bit higher than that, but we're not changing the format of government. We're not doing anything like that. They're tweaks to the existing system. That's all. Right.
So what happens is you guys get in there as a council and government's operating, and then you realize that there might be a flaw in the charter that isn't best for everybody.
Yeah.
Council or the county executive. So you guys talk about making a change to that, but the voters have to approve that.
Exactly. It's not up to the council to change the charter. It's not up to the executive to change the charter. It's up to the voters. Every charter amendment has to be approved or rejected by the voters. So it's not our say. It's not the council's say. The council, is not changing the charter. The council's putting things out there for the people to choose to change the charter.
Right. But one of the concerns is actually I got an email yesterday from a guy who had just moved to the area, had read our story in the Salisbury Independent about the charter thing, and he asked what the history of the county was. Is it common for the county to put so many charter amendments or so many voter-decided issues on a ballot? And he actually made a connection to the Western United States, where ballot measures are very common. They're not as common in the East. There's a cultural thing about that. So he was discussing that more. So he's wondering what the history of the county was. And I hadn't really thought about it. There's always been stuff on the ballot, a lot of state initiatives. but this seems to be more than normal.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the West, like you say, I mean, they vote on everything.
Right, they really do.
There's much more direct democracy.
In California, there's
sort
like 80 ballot initiatives in
Well,
this,
yeah,
in
I
this
mean,
election.
there's quite a few that,
Yeah.
and so, and I, kind of appreciate more of that direct democracy sort of view. I wish the state allowed initiatives and recall and things like that. I mean, it's kind of surprising that Maryland has very limited avenue for direct citizen participation in government. And, and actually that goes to some of the, things on, we can talk about a little bit later about, special elections and things like that.
Right.
But if you look at other counties are doing some similar things. I mean, there's I think they said Anne Arundel County had more than a dozen on their ballot, whether it's this year or last year. I believe Baltimore City's having multiple on their ballot. So whether it's common in Wicomico County or not, I mean, it is something that voters in other jurisdictions are able to read and digest these amendments, or ballot initiatives or ballot referenda, and so I really don't think that the citizens of Wicomico County are less capable than the citizens of Anne Arundel County or citizens of California to understand and decide these issues. I mean, it's the idea that the average voter can't understand the ramifications of that, as I believe some remarks in your news story were, I think are completely false and kind of elitist. That the council has a duty to present information out there about what they are, and we've posted the information on our website. We're talking to the press, obviously.
Right. I appreciate
Yeah.
this. This is some way to put
Yeah,
it in
exactly.
context.
We have a duty to do these things. On
Yeah.
my Facebook page, I'm every day I'm going through.
You are.
every
You're
day
analyzing
and,
each one every day. And
so,
I'd recommend people look at his Facebook page because it's very instructional.
So yeah, we have the duty to do that, and the people also have a duty to investigate these things and look at them. But I think people are perfectly capable of understanding the ramifications and deciding on their own. And it's ultimately up to them. It's not up to council members or any other elected official to say you need to vote this way or you need to vote that way. Here's the arguments. Here's why we're doing this. You can decide whether it's a good idea or not. And if it's not, that's fine. I mean, we live under the charter. We have to obey the charter that the people put in place. It's not our job to put the charter in place.
Right. Now, we have a strong county executive form of government. Some people would say that these amendments are watering down his powers to a degree. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on where you're sitting.
Well, there's a checks and balances
Yeah, there's
system.
checks and balances.
You guys want to be as strong as you can on the council. He wants to be as strong as he can as county executive.
Yeah.
But what's your feeling on that?
Well, my feeling is that we have an executive form of government. We also have a legislative form of government. The executive does not rule unilaterally. There are, the county council is elected by the people the same as the executive is. And I'm a big believer in checks and balances in terms of the executive and the legislative branch, and frankly the people. So if you look at these amendments, they're kind of a mix of, introducing more checks and balances into the system where the council may have a few more opportunities to influence, like say the personnel manual, for instance, where we're essentially cut out of it completely right now. The amendment that would modify the personnel manual, modification process basically is one that doesn't take away power from the executive, but instead opens up the door for the council to also, have some say in that. But there's also the issue of like with special elections. Right now, if there's a vacancy in the county council, even if it occurs, the second day of, the person's term, the council gets to appoint a replacement for the entire rest of the term.
Right.
And so, I don't think that's proper. I mean, I would prefer to see the people, it's the person's supposed to be representing the people on the council. And so, if the voters approve it, and if we have a special election for county council members, that takes away the power of the council. That introduces a check on the council's power by the people. So, it's kind of I like having a little more complicated things with checks and balances, and where one branch of government cannot do things unilaterally. And I think that these amendments show kind of that mix and allow for more cooperation between the council and the executive and more say by the people of Wicomico County into their government.
Right. The one about the special election, the only criticism I've heard about that is that the window is still pretty big. So if the person is out within the year, there's a special election, but it could be extended closer to an available election, perhaps?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always a balancing act, because if you put it up too close to election day, the state of Maryland has certain filing deadlines where you have to file to run for run the primary and run the general election.
Right.
If it was 2 days before the filing deadline, is that sufficient time to allow people to actually file their candidacy and decide all those things? So I mean,
and then the presidential years, the primaries are way ahead of
Well, yeah, I mean, the state changes those things too,
Right.
so I mean, it's tied to the state date and the state changes those dates. So, it's kind of hard to say what the state will do in the future. But, yeah, I mean, the reason it was concurrent with presidential elections is so that the county wouldn't have the expense of, having a special election for one office, at some random time of year. We didn't want to, have a $30,000 spent on a special election,
Right.
when you can just save money by, literally just adding, a name to the ballot. So it was it's trying to balance cost savings, practicalities of running for office and things like that. So, every single one of these, there are criticisms that could be leveraged. You could have done this differently. You could have done that differently. But at some point you have to kind of draw a line and say this is what it's going to be. So.
Right. One of the other, you mentioned the personnel thing. That's kind of controversial. If I'm the county executive, I kind of want to be able to make the policies for my employees. I kind of understand that. Do you feel like that's meddling in what the county executive does?
We're not meddling in the day-to-day policies of how he manages things. We're talking about the personnel manual, which is a thick manual about that should govern what the executive does day to day, in terms of policies and things like that, but not in the decisions he makes about what happens with roads and things like that. It's kind of the overall governing structure of how the executive manages personnel.
Right.
And right now, that the executive formulates that and submits it to council for approval. And if he wants to change it, he submits that to council for approval. That will all remain. I mean, that power is not being taken away from the executive. But under this charter amendment, what would happen is if the council sees something wrong in the personnel manual that they would want to change, that they can propose that and pass it, and then the executive can veto it if he wants or sign it. It's not diminishing his power, it's expanding the council's power. Again, it's more of a checks and balances thing.
Right.
So, I don't view it as a diminishment of the executive's power. I view it as an expansion of the council's power and, more of an ability if there, are issues. If, county employees come to us and say, this is, we view this as, some sort of problem in the way the personnel manual is, that we can initiate that change. That's all that it is. And, that power may never be exercised by the council. But, it's good to have the power there to use, even if you don't ultimately use it, just, in case there is some sort of situation that comes up.
Right. It's kind of a silly thing, but the big issue I remember with the employee handbook in the last 10 years was that Rick Pollock gave the county employees their birthday off.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that was heavily criticized in the last election. Bob Culver did not agree with that, and Rick tried to explain it, and I think most of us in the public didn't I don't get my birthday off, so I mean that was sort of the attitude of the public who gets their birthday off. You can take a personal day for your birthday if you want, but it's not like a... But anyway, so Bob gets elected, he wants to change this thing in the handbook, and it wasn't that easy.
Well, I mean, I think the birthday thing, I don't even think that was in the handbook.
Was it in the handbook?
I mean, I think that was just a policy.
A departmental policy.
And Bob changed that, and I think he had the power to do it, and he did it.
Yeah.
But this is the personnel manual in term. I mean, there's a variety of things about how retirement's accrued, things like that. I mean, so these are substantive things that really matter to the county employees, and really matter to some of the retirees and things like that. So again, it's allowing the council to have an avenue to address some of these issues if they come up. That's all that it is. It's not removing power from the executive.
And there have been some issues there with former employees upset about some changes in the healthcare coverage and what they have to pay.
Yeah.
So you all have been on the receiving end of those concerns.
Yeah, and that's was kind of where this came up, was that the retirees came in and said I had this concern, and so we were talking about this, and our legal counsel said that this isn't necessarily even a personnel manual issue, but if it were, it doesn't matter. You guys can't do anything about it. If this were in the personnel manual, you couldn't change the personnel manual to stop this. It's only if the executive gives you the personnel manual to change, then you can amend it. And so that got people thinking, like, why, we can legislate on a variety of other things. We can legislate on poultry houses. We can legislate on stray dogs. It seems strange that we can't initiate legislation about, county government and how personnel rules work. So that's, that's really where that came from.
One thing you're doing too is the word codifying. Codifying what happens when you all cut the budget and where the funding goes.
Yeah.
Explain that to me a little bit.
Well, under the charter, the council has one job and one job only with the budget, is to cut the budget. Now, I'm a budget hawk. I like that. I'm a big fan of that. So, great. Let's cut the budget. The problem with the charter is it doesn't say what happens with the money once you cut. The charter says the budget has to be balanced. And so let's say the county executive submits a $130 million budget, and we cut $1 million out of it. we have $130 million in revenue and $129 million in expenses. If we vote on that budget, it's technically not in balance. And it hasn't really been an issue in the past because under both Pollitt and under Culver, the council and the executive will work together that when there's been cuts that, the council says maybe we want $1 million in roads or something like that.
You find some place to put the $1 million.
Well, the council can suggest that.
Right.
The executive, can reject that or accept it, but the executive will then submit an amended budget that finds some place to put that money. Now, the default place to put the money is contingency, which is just unexpended funds that are available later for whatever.
Or goes the rainy day.
Yeah. So I mean, technically it's moved to it's called, there's a contingency line item there, and so that's kind of the place where you kind of drop money that you're not, you don't have any plans on spending immediately. And so that's worked out well. There hasn't really been an issue. Even when we've disagreed, even this last year it kind of got contentious, but we didn't disagree about where the money went at the end. It goes into contingency. And so the problem really comes up then is what if you have a council and executive that don't agree on this? Because technically the council can't add money even to contingency now, even though it's not really being spent on anything. And so, I kind of view charters as part of their role is being there in case of worst case scenarios. What happens when the cooperation does break down? And this is just simply saying that if cooperation breaks down, that we're going to codify what the current practice is that the money goes into contingency. It again should be non-controversial. That's what we do anyway. That's the way the practice works. So let's put it in the charter to make sure that years down the road, if there's an issue, that there isn't a charter crisis essentially or a budget crisis that the council's violating the charter by enacting an imbalanced budget. So the idea that the council, doesn't know the fiscal processes is, as I heard charged, that this is a ridiculous amendment. We've had, council members on there, who've been through many budget processes. Joe Holloway, John Cannon, Larry Dodd have been through more budget processes than, the director of administration who made that remark. They I think they know how the budget process works. And, that's a real concern that John Cannon had in the Charter Review Committee. And that, we talked about that kind of at length, and nothing was ultimately done there on that. But, it's not an issue. This wasn't an issue that came up with the council and with the current executive or anything like that. This is an issue that has been thought about, frankly, for a long time. So.
Isn't there an art though to government? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's kind of like the Lincoln movie question in the presidential debate this week, where if you watch the movie Lincoln or read the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, Abraham Lincoln in many ways is sort of a manipulating liar in terms of getting the 13th Amendment passed, but he's the greatest leader ever. He's Abraham Lincoln. So if I'm sitting there, I'm a council member, and I know I want roads, so I'm going to vote to cut with everyone else, cut the $1 million, but I've done something with the county executive to support something else of his, knowing that when I go with this, asking for this $1 million, Bob, would you put it into the road fund, for me and my people? There's like a political thing there, and if it's codified, maybe it's not the same. There's no negotiating room. Does that make sense?
I mean, there's still negotiating room if you want to put it somewhere else other than contingency.
Right.
This is only saying, worst case scenario, it goes into unexpended funds. And honestly, you can move money out of contingency any time during the year if you want to, and the council does that fairly regularly, in terms of the share, Michael, Sheriff Lewis has always come before us to, we need this moved out of contingency, we need that moved out of contingency. So, there's also the process of moving things out of contingency. So,
but it forces a discussion. Everyone agrees. There's nothing's done sort of behind any closed doors, I guess.
Well, nothing is done behind closed doors in any of this, anyway.
Right.
Our budget process is open. This Charter Review Committee process was not behind closed doors. All this stuff, we have to govern it in the open. So, but again, this is more of worst case scenario. Let's make sure that there's kind of a backstop there, and that's all. It's we kind of have to think in terms of what happens if things don't go, smoothly. If there is a real conflict, if there is, the county executive and the council really can't agree on the budget, what then? And it may never need to be used, but that's let's get it in place so that we don't have these crises down the road.
Right. So much of what's behind a lot of this is the situation with the county attorneys. Bob Culver gets elected. He doesn't like the county law department situation, so he hires his own attorney. Doesn't clue the council in quite the way that you guys wanted to be involved in that. Blows up the county law department. You all end up hiring back the original county attorney after he retired, and you're paying him. how significant is this attorney issue? And I know, normal, real people don't care or understand that, but is it significant in what's going on in the county government, this legal representation issue?
Well, I think it is significant. It's a little bit separate from some of these charter amendments. I mean, in the sense that the county attorney really works for both branches of government, the legislative and the executive. And, that attorney is our legal advice, when we wanted, when Ed first worked for the county as the county attorney, I emailed him, quite often, like, is it legal to do this? Is it legal to do that? And if Ed says, you can't do this by charter, you don't do it. He's kind of the arbiter of what's legal and what's not. That's
Right.
the role the county attorney should play, kind of an independent legal authority for the council and the executive. And the way it's set up in charter, the attorney has independence from both branches because the attorney is supposed to be confirmed by the council, appointed by the executive, confirmed by the council. But then once that attorney is confirmed, the executive cannot unilaterally remove the attorney. And the council can only remove the attorney by a majority vote, or the executive and the council can agree to remove the attorney. So that gives the attorney some independence to say, no, county executive, what you're doing is illegal, or no, council, what you're doing is illegal, without fear that he or she will lose the job. Right now, under a contract situation, where there isn't even a written contract with with Paul Wilbur, and
this is Bob's attorney.
Yeah. Well, he's the acting county attorney.
Yeah, I understand.
He's the acting county attorney. And, the danger there is that there is no independence there. There's no independence with the attorney. If the executive doesn't like a decision by the attorney, it just stops payment, which would, cost the law firm hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, that sets up a series of incentives, which I think is very dangerous for the county. And so that's, if Paul Wilbur was submitted, as the charter requires, submitted to the council, his name submitted as county attorney, I would probably vote for Paul Wilbur. I mean, I'm not sure, we'd have to go through the kind of process, or if Bob wanted to have a contract position, the attorney has a contract position. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. I would probably support that. If the
But
cost
that would
savings
fit the reorganization of government,
yeah,
which is another one of the charter amendments.
exactly. Well, because the reorganization of government, you can't just unilaterally reorganize government. It says that any reorganization has to be done through the budget process, actually, and show that it the
Right.
impacts on the budget, and then it has to be approved by the council. It's fair. I mean, the county council plays a role in our government too, and so when this all was going on, the issue came up of what does reorganization mean. We had the county attorney, before Ed Baker retired, opined one thing, that it was a reorganization. Paul Wilbur, under contract, opined that his hiring was not reorganization. So what do you do then? Again, as I said in the paper, your reorganization is not my reorganization.
Right.
There are terms used in the charter, and sometimes it's necessary to define those terms. So one of the amendments attempts to define those terms. Right now there is no reorganization. So if you have one branch of government saying that's not reorganization, it doesn't trigger this charter the charter process. There's no recourse in that. So
The speed of all this has been criticized. 4 of the 9 things have come through the charter review committee.
Yeah.
5 of them are being initiated by the council this time. It just feels fast and rushed. So made the point there's been no public hearing on this stuff. I guess there's no really, you don't have to have a public hearing. I mean, the vote is a public hearing.
exactly.
But do you feel any guilt about the speed? Do you wish it had been more of a leisurely examination in this, or is it okay?
Well, I mean, you can. It's always easy to criticize process because you can always do things differently. There's always choices to be made, and no matter what choice you make, there's something you could have done differently. So, criticizing process is kind of what you fall back to when you don't really have much substance in terms of criticizing the actual facts on the ground. So. Yeah, I mean, you can always criticize us on process. We could have done it longer. We could have had a public hearing, things like that. As you say, there's no requirement for public hearing. The voters, the election is the ultimate public hearing. The voters get a say. We started this back in June, possibly May. I forget, when our first work session was. It was an open work session. The executive and director of administration were there for, at least a couple of them. They certainly didn't raise any issues about public hearings at that time. They could have easily stood up and said, anything at that time. We discussed these at open council meetings. We're discussing them in the press. So, I'm not sure what, we could do differently that would have mattered all that much. If I had to go back on it, sure, let's have a public hearing on it. Why not? But, on the Charter Review Committee, we threw all this stuff out to the public, and there was a lot of publicity about it, and we had open meetings and invited the public for their ideas. One person gave us ideas for charter amendments. John Palmer, who's very active in watching the government. He's the only person that volunteered anything for the Charter Review Committee. So, the idea of criticizing us on process again is when I think you fall back to when there's not real substance to the criticism of the amendments. Because when you look at the amendments, I view them as fairly uncontroversial. Or, if they are controversial, they're things that, we can talk about it and we can explain it and we can have a real discussion on these issues and the voters get to decide.
Right.
But, this has not been going on for 6 weeks, as some have claimed. This has been going on since at least June, if not earlier than that. So, it was not done behind closed doors. It was not done in violation of the charter. This followed the process completely. So,
it was a work session item.
Yeah, it was a work. I mean, there were multiple work sessions on it. It was discussed in our legislative sessions. So, and one of these amendments actually came from a suggestion from the executive's office. So,
Which one was that?
That was the one about the council's attorney.
Okay.
So, he'd written us a letter and expressed, that maybe you guys should have that as one of your amendments. So, if the executive wanted to be involved in this process, like I said, he was in the room. Could have brought up any of these things. He did write us a letter suggesting, one of these things. So I don't really, the criticism after the fact, to me, it just seems very, very baseless.
Now, he said he's going to recommend to voters that they vote against all the amendments.
I mean, again, I find it strange that he suggested an amendment and then, says vote against it, but that's his prerogative. I mean, I also find it strange that, if he's considering using tax money to do this, if the voters of Wicomico County, should not have their taxes subsidized in any, kind of personal campaign against these things. So I think he should be very careful about that. But, it's his right to say, to advocate how he wants. I don't think that it's, up to the politicians to tell people how to vote. I think that it's, up to the, those of us that have a view on these things to, explain them, to educate them, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. And then the voters can figure out whether or not the substance is legitimate or not. Special elections. I think it makes a lot of sense to have vacancies filled by special elections. I have friends who think that no, it's better to have people who know these issues better to be able to pick someone that would serve well in the job. It's a difference of opinion, but it's a legitimate opinion, and you vote one way or the other based on that. And again, it's not my say. And the county government works, well with the current charter. I think it will work better with these amendments. But again, that's for the voters to decide. That's not for me to tell the voters what to do on it. It's for me to, explain the rationale behind them and how they would work, and then the voters get to decide what to do.
I know I have a story up at SalisburyIndependent.net with all the charter amendments, the way they're written, the way they're going to appear on the ballot. Yeah. Where do you recommend people go to get more information?
Well, they're also on the county website. If you look at, wicomicocounty.org, there's on the left-hand column, there's something that talks about the November 8th referendum that has information about these amendments, about the school board referendum, information about that. Like I said, on my Facebook page, I'm, going through, Marc, Kilmer, Wicomico County Council. I'm going through each of them and explaining, and people can ask questions. I mean, you can always email, call, the county council members should be there for people to answer questions on this, certainly. So, if you have questions, talk to your county council members. This was a unanimous vote by all the council members to put this on the ballot. It takes a supermajority. We had a unanimous vote to put these on the ballot. So, the council members, very much view these things as important for the voters to decide. So, if you see your council member and you have questions, ask them.
Right. And it's important to look at this stuff before you get in the voting booth, because it's a little confusing and you're going to be rushed when you're in there. So it's good to know what's going on in advance.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I have full trust that the voters of Wicomico County can understand the ramifications of these, can understand what's in them. Just take some time, read through them. If you have questions, ask.
He's Marc Kilmer. He's the District 2 representative on the Wicomico County Council. Right in the middle of the news right now with these charter amendments, charter review committee amendments, and an election coming up here in November. Thanks, Marc, for being here.
Okay, well, thank you.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.